What a fun thing, and what a pleasure. I think Dale, I'd have to ask if you wouldn't mind to begin with you, in a sense, like to begin in the way that we begin with most things in our lives and so on. It's the invocation that I associate entirely with you. You might not have your guitar on you.
I do not. It's in the garage.
All right. But I don't know whether if you feel like singing it, I'll sing it back to you.
In the name of the Father.
In the name of the Father.
Of the Father.
Of the Son.
In the name of the Son.
In the name of the Spirit.
In the name of the Spirit.
The three in one. The three in one.
Oh, yeah. All right. So
I guess we ought to all be in a choir.
Yeah, right on. I mean, asynchronous and all, as Zoom tends to do it. But that's a serious legacy, and I know I completely associate that with you and that way of joining together during your tenure, not just as camp director, but whenever you'd be there as a volunteer or as a volunteer chaplain. I associate that really strongly with you. How would you chart your involvement at camp? When did you first hear it at Camp Mowana? Was it via your kids or church? What was it?
My first trip to Camp Mowana was about 1952.
I
was dropped off as an 8-year-old by my parents. And we then had our swimming test in the water underneath the Y Bridge, which was ancient history, of course. Scared to death, homesick, I think, every day that I was there, because that was really the first time I'd been away from home. But that was the beginning. I remember that very well. Oswego was just in the kind of dream stage of being built. I think there were some plans maybe around for that, but it was a grand beginning. And then my continuation with Camp Mowana began while I was in seminary, came back as a discovery leader, and then chaplain, and so it's been long, it's been extensive, it's been just wonderful, wonderful. Years ago.
When you think back to your experience as a camper, how would you note, there would be many ways of talking about difference and different experience, but what are some ways you'd contrast that experience or what Mowana felt like when you were a child compared with, I guess, particularly the years when you were a director, but let's say latter years?
Well, it was impossible for me to walk onto Camp Mowana without remembering my time there as a child. And Katie Shackle pointed out one time that my name was even written in the craft cabin on one of the rafters, because that was the cabin that I was staying in, and I rapidly defaced that property. So
good for you.
There's something completely and clearly sacred about just entering that camp. The hills that have remained and will forever remain, everything is uphill wherever you are. The next place you want to go is uphill.
Always uphill, always uphill. Yeah, you build up leg muscles. I generally felt that myself at the end of a summer, one of the summers when I worked there.
Yep.
It's a very particular sense of place that you get, because you don't go anywhere, especially when you're a child for a week, or if you're working there as well. It is your world.
Mm-hmm. It is. And what a wonderful world it is.
Truly. So I guess I'm hearing in that sense that sense of the mystique of the place and the sense of threshold. I cross this threshold and I'm in this deep connection to earlier places in yourself. Like that has been consistent all.
Yes. It has been consistent right up to the last time we drove by it on Fleming Falls Road and couldn't go in
Yeah.
because it's, it's closed, and I understand that. But there is a mystique about Camp Mowana that is unmatched in my history.
Mhm.
I'm at our daughter Katie and her husband's house because the internet is much stronger here than it is at Ginger's and my little house. And I was just chatting with our oldest grandson because he never had a chance to experience Mowana. So when I say Mowana, our youngest grandson said, "That's a movie, isn't it?" He's right. But it's about a little Indian girl. So, oh, and by the way, I just want you to see my shirt.
Oh,
Right.
yes.
I
Yeah.
got this while I thought Camp Mowana would live forever.
Yeah.
But so now I have to preserve it because I've not been very careful with it. So
How a mystique is a difficult thing to put into words
yes,
in that sense. But I'm going to ask you anyway, if you had to put that into words, and I mean the sense of your relationship to the land
Mhm.
itself and the effect that that has, what are some of the words that you would use to describe it? Where does it reside? What is it? Where does it reside in you?
It's sacred.
Mhm.
There are times when I felt much like I needed to take off my shoes because the ground on which I was walking was sacred.
Amen. Yeah.
So I would do that occasionally,
Mhm.
even in the pine forest. It was just such a nice cushion in there. Another word that helps me to understand mystique is kind of a forever nature,
Mhm.
because it continued to come back every year. It would be green and fresh, and the flowers, the trillium, and all that stuff would show up every year.
Yeah.
So it was perpetual. And I wouldn't go so far as to say it's eternal, but it indeed was a sacred place for me. And I think that pretty much encompasses mystique because I can't comprehend the sacred. I just know, I know when I'm there.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that impulse to to take off your shoes for you stand on holy ground. I understand that deeply for myself, and I imagine the other folks here do too, whatever
Yeah.
words they would use for it. How did, given that the physical place changed over the course of your experience with it, or I guess maybe that's an assumption on my part.
Oh, it did.
Would you say that it
It
did?
did.
How would you name that?
Well, it was one of the difficult struggles we had, as you probably remember, was when we had to move candlelight service from Friday to Thursday,
Right.
because that just kind of turned the culture of Camp Mowana upside down for everyone who had experienced Friday. But Loma was going through a transition. Camp Mowana was going through a transition.
Right.
But in the midst of all that transition, the faithfulness of the counselors, of the staff, and of the people who supported Mowana was consistent. So that was probably, for me, that was the difficult transition. I resisted that. I didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Even then, I was kind of happy with the way it was and wasn't too crazy about changing it because candlelight was the end of the week.
Yeah, no, you had good company in that. I think those were the years that I worked there too, and
Yes.
was,
Yes.
that was a difficult. It shifted your sense both of the spiritual and emotional arc of
It
the
did.
week, with bringing a cabin together, working with people. That notion of when do you go home and what's the relationship of that to your time together. Yeah, that changed it greatly, didn't it?
Well, there was a time when I would quietly under my breath call Friday a now what day. I mean, we just experienced candlelight Thursday night. Well, now what do we do? I mean, supposed to be packing up to go home on Saturday.
Or like one big long picnic with potato chips.
Yes.
There's only so much of that you can
Right.
you can do. Yes.
But as
Speaking
you
of-
know,
good.
the staff miraculously responded. Didn't like it any better than I did, but they were in support, and it was good, all good.
Speaking of potato chips,
Yes.
one of the many constants in all of our lives at camp, of course, is food.
Food.
And food. And how would you describe the food of your camper experience in the 50s?
Oh, um, it, it was a special time. Uh, for, as a very small child, I thought, what is this? All this noise in the dining hall. What is this craziness? But then I kind of got to enjoying it,
Mm.
and always looked forward to the food. It was always good.
Mhm.
And my favorite meal, as I'm sure it was for many, was the tomato soup and toasted cheese sandwiches.
Oh,
That was one of my very favorite meals. And as on volunteer staff and as director, that continued. Ginger and I would both really look forward to that. We'd walk over to the dining hall, and that was yummy.
truly. And that's something I remember both as a camper and growing up and as a counselor. And part of it was the staff, I'm sure at the time, like, dear Helen Bayer, and the kitchen staff who worked, and their ability to really take food and make it into something that was itself, I mean, I won't say sacramental, but made with love, with a whole lot of love. And regardless of what it was, I think another aspect of spending so much of your day outdoors means that by the time you come to the dining hall, you are hungry.
You're hungry.
You are. It doesn't really matter. Corn dogs, bring it on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the other sacred things about Camp Mowana was the silver cow.
Yeah.
You always had to get permission before you went close to that. I thought for sure it was wired for electricity, so if you open the door, you're going to get shot. But yeah,
Exactly. That an alarm would perhaps go off. That brings up for me kind of the other question, like spending time there. If you're just there as a child for a week, the part of the mystery of the place can be that sense of the unknown, or certain ways of being and doing, whether it's words to songs, or where you go to do this, or even getting lost or something of that sort. And over time, your experience with those things can become a sense of what we call a tradition or a custom, in that sense. What are some memories that you have around some customs or even some rules, like the silver cow or something of that sort? Like, for example, I remember for me at Family Week as a child, I knew where the pop machine was in Oswego because we were allowed to use it. Family Week folks
right.
use it. I had to beg for quarters from my parents, but that was a different matter. But then to be there as a counselor, then that flipped over, and that was a secret and hidden thing, or so we thought.
Yes.
And the life of the place seems to be filled with things of that sort. Things things you're supposed to know, customs and traditions.
Well, yeah, I'm anxious to go back and see Hoppy's Cave, see if it's still there. I mean, there's some of those legends that I think will live forever. And you're right. Some of the things that we learned as campers. So you were just joshing me about that when we got to be old enough to participate at a different level. But the general rules of manners in the dining hall, I think, has a lasting impression on people. The way they're supposed to, be quiet when other people talk and you wait for your turn. I think some of those things live forever with folks, as they should. And so it's a breeding ground, I think, for good moral, cultural behavior.
Yeah. Did they sing elbows off the table? Yes, I have a memory of that. In fact, I probably sang that outside of a Camp Mowana setting at one point.
Yeah.
It didn't quite translate. That brings up something else for me. Given your experience there over the decades and from a child onward, were there moments at which you realized, particularly as a child, the contrast between that world that evolved and then the rest of your life? And
Yes.
how would you note that?
I think that was much more apparent for me as I came back as a volunteer staff and as a camper, because of the sacred nature that I felt at Camp Mowana. And I didn't really want to go back out into that world on Saturday, whenever that got to happen, because there was a shelter, a safe haven kind of notion about that, that I think was just, it was wonderful. People did feel safe. Even when some of the Holstein cows would get loose and get into the camp, it was still a safe place. But yeah, for me, it was tough to get back in the groove to leave the place. I wanted to hang around and continue to not run away, but it was a safe place where you could actually be yourself, where you could be vulnerable and still be cared for. So.
That's how I would have named that for myself, I think, whether as a teenager, maybe before I had the words for it in that sense. Most certainly. And that was a contrast that I couldn't always name either, to less safe places in the world. Yeah, a place of love at its best.
Right.
Truly.
Where the light of Christ shines through.
Where the light of Christ shines through. And that as a certain song has put it, that is to me so much of what my experience, I think, at Mowana over the years could be found in song, which I think is in many ways one of the reasons why I just came to love your presence as director or as chaplain, because you were, I know your email might be Racing Rev, but Singing Rev would be another way of naming that, I think, for me. What camp songs come to mind? I know when we would, as counselors, have to divvy up to lead songs, they were coded. There were the fast funny, the slow funny, the fast serious, and slow serious. These categories like that. Serious meaning spiritual generally, as opposed to song. What camp songs come to mind for you?
One of the ones that, interestingly enough, it's been running through my mind even in these last several days, is "Humble Thyself in the Sight of the Lord," sung in a round.
Yeah.
And He will raise you up.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons that has stuck with, because we did that in chapel often, and we do it in a round, and I don't know how we managed, but every staff person had a beautiful voice. And so sung in a round, it was always a beautiful piece. And today, when I see the incredible selfishness and I'm entitled to all this stuff in our world, I just think, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, I think that's one that has stuck with me over the years. And there's just so many of them, that especially sung in rounds, that are just.
I tend to, in that category, I definitely go, and it is really, I think, the first time in my life that I sang "Seek Ye First," although I've sung it in many other settings since then, but that I always felt, in fact, I was surprised years later in, elsewhere Churchyville to realize that other people who hadn't gone to Camp Mowana knew that song. And apparently, yes, obviously, it's, part of whether it's part of the charismatic renewal, whether it's part, wherever it's lodged culturally.
Yeah.
I so wholly identified that with Mowana, I think, because something about that, like you were saying for "Humble Thyself," for me, that idea of seek first the kingdom of God, I thought, oh, wow, for me, that is a lot of what Mowana is. It's what we're trying to do here, in humility, in love, but to seek that first, and then to sing that and break out into the round or the canon with alleluias. I can sing that in other settings these days, but it pretty quickly takes me back to brown painted bleachers. you know? Yeah.
Well, and for some, whether we like it or even realize it or not, for example, seek ye first out of scripture. I mean, it's verses from Matthew.
Mhm.
And for some of the kids who came, that might have been their only real exposure to scripture that they would remember, even though they studied it every day or, did crafts and stuff. But
Mhm.
that might be something that stuck with them. So
Yeah, Katie Shackle used a phrase, and who knows, she would have gotten it from you. She called it the big blue bathtub of acceptance. And to mention what you were naming earlier, and that what felt important, I think definitely as a counselor for young children, was that they felt the love, the acceptance, the humility, and then they could then themselves realize, oh, this is
yeah,
the kingdom of God. This is, they could in that way be brought to that sense of understanding on their own, almost on their own terms in that sense. Like because as you say, so many of my campers, because they would sometimes come in church groups with some kind of a religious background, but many of them, of course, didn't. They
right,
came with a friend.
right.
Let alone our weeks with, remember the Red Cross
Oh,
camp
yes.
with asthma,
Hmm.
the several years of that. And
Yep.
that was always a great experience in
Hmm.
intercultural understanding and religious understanding too. But what was first seemed to be the love, the acceptance, the humility,
May I just share a personal story about asthma camp?
Yep.
One of the outpost evenings, when we outposted with them, that was part of the story about the Holstein cattle that got loose in the field next door, and they invaded our campsite. But one of the young campers that was in the group that I happened to spend the night with stuttered terrifically. Just couldn't. It was just very difficult to get a word or two. And as we sat around that small campfire on that night that we were outposting, and we began to sing, Seek Ye First, he sang every word of that loud and clear, but he couldn't put 6 words together other than that in a conversation. So, yeah, I think it works.
Songs, I think they go hand in hand, don't they? That sense of acceptance, being loved and being welcomed, and singing together is a way of just not to put of embodying it.
Right.
In
It
that,
is.
yeah,
Absolutely.
it is. One of the years that you were director, that one of the summers, I believe, was the year that we did Godspell.
Amen.
Yeah, and that was a powerful experience.
I
Truly.
will be disillusioned if when I get to heaven, you are not the embodiment of Jesus himself, since you played that role in Godspell.
Well, Dale, I'll be pretty disappointed because I hope that somebody else is Jesus when I do that. Emphatically, not me. But it was it's a powerful experience, I think, as a community to do that on a weekly, to tell that story and embody it on a weekly basis.
Every night. I mean, every week.
Every
Yes.
week. And I remember people came from, I want to say just some Mansfield and Ashland churches.
Yes.
In that sense.
It was not uncommon to have church groups from churches 50 to 100 miles away come just to witness that on a Sunday evening.
Did you have that, thinking back to that, did you have that sense at the beginning of that summer? Did you reach out to, I think it was Julie Mattis.
Julie Mattis, yeah.
Did she reach out to you, or did you reach out to her and say, hey, I think we should do Godspell this summer?
It was one of those God moments when I said something, boy, it would really be cool if we could do some kind of a musical. And she had that look on her face that said, I might be able to help with that. And the next thing that happened was she acquired the scripts, the music, etc., and tirelessly worked, all as staff worked hours to make that happen.
Yeah.
It was that's a highlight for me of my time at Camp Mowana, just to see how the staff came together and to see how that affected the campers. It was phenomenal.
Truly. it was a gift. I mean, still, it's a
Yep.
moving thing to think about too. A basic question, and I've got my list of thoughtful things that I think Karen and Nick put together as well. But so if this sends us off in a different direction, feel free to redirect. But if I ask you, what's your favorite place at camp? Because it's quite the diverse landscape in that sense.
Yeah.
Do you have one?
Yes. The chapel was probably one of the, well, not probably, was definitely one of the highlights. A place I would go regularly, and at Fleming Falls, to sit by the falls. And then the third one is a quiet walk through the pines.
Yeah.
Those are the three for me. Any one of which is just comforting, again, and sacred in its
Yes.
own way.
Yes. Yeah, very true. And that waterfalls of just a fascinating thing. I think I remember thinking so much of my own experience of Camp Mowana as a physical place was the place apart. You know, you go into it and it's almost like, there's a dome or Brigadoon or Narnia, that how do you possibly get there in that sense?
Yeah.
And so many aspects of the landscape there felt rare and special, as indeed they are. And I remember being a little shocked at some point, looking on the map or going on a wider walk, to realize how close some of the neighbors are. Like, I think there's the mobile home park not too far through the woods, let alone the Winger Farm, or and then also to realize ways in which, and not to phrase it too much in the negative, but like, there was runoff, whether from people's lawns or their septic tanks or so on, in the creeks, and in the watershed, and so forth. That's a problem everywhere. But realizing that for me as an adult required, Mowana was still a place apart, but it was most certainly also a place of its landscape, part of Richland County, part of the Mohican River watershed, all those things. Did you ever experience moments of, I mean, you were like the primary custodian as director for a few years, having to deal with things like septic tanks and so forth.
Yeah. I became kind of possessive, and we had some issues with intruders a few times.
Yes.
And one of them involved some time in court, and it just felt like, this is my place for family and friends. You don't get to come in here and make noise and be ugly and scare our staff and our campers. And the runoff, as you well know, some of the odor came from our own processing plant behind Oneida, but some of it also came from the creek, the river itself. And there was more than one occasion when I had visit with county commissioners and the health department about ways to, where is the distress coming from? So yeah, it indeed is a place apart, and yet it had all the trappings of the real world. And so it was necessary to be in the world, but not of it.
So your experience of that necessary contrast seems to have engendered a protective sensibility, I think was the phrase that you used.
Yeah. Yep. It did.
I understand that one deeply. How, another broad question, take it as you like. How would you say that your experience over the decades at Mowana, how has it influenced your own spirituality, your own relationship with God. You know, the simple questions, Dale. You know,
Well, my experience at Camp Mowana has helped me really to understand that self-care is not a dirty word.
Mm.
It is important to take time to step back, and I'm not sure how exactly, but Camp Mowana offered opportunities to do that.
Mhm.
It was fairly easy to walk away from the office or walk away from the dining hall and go someplace that was quiet, where you could just kind of dig into some quiet time.
Yeah. So even the place of being there said, Dale,
Right.
put that work down for a
Yeah.
bit. Come and be refreshed.
Right, right. And that has continued to be a part of my life. One of the things we did, one of the churches that I served, where we had a pretty large staff, was to let folks know that a tithe of their time every week should be spent in devotion, prayer, and time. And if somebody calls on the phone or wants to see, I'm sorry, they're having a time of devotion now. Now that didn't wash well initially, but after a while, people kind of respected that and said, that's a really good example, because we're expecting these people to be our spiritual leaders. And I do credit Camp Mowana with that, because my favorite time every day at Camp Mowana was in the morning. Walk out of the house and listen to the brook babbling down as I walk over to the dining hall or wherever else I was on my way to. It was just an incredible, fresh, new day,
Mhm.
and full of possibilities from the Lord.
Mhm.
And so it seemed like it was important to take time to honor that.
Yeah, time itself is a gift to be received like that. And one of the monastic communities I was like 10 years ago reading up on was using the phrase, not that it was theirs, but in the Christian tradition, the notion of sanctifying time, which in the monastic tradition, is very specific. You pray 7 to 9 times a day. There's that sense of setting apart and measuring what you're doing. But in many ways, the Camp Mowana day and week was its own, daily office or, experience of uh, whether it was the more overt things like playing music in the morning to wake us up as a practical thing, but it also sets your mind and your heart
Yes.
in a particular direction. Yes, there are cabin devotions, but there's often, there's also a rest period.
Yep.
There's a scheduled rhythm of time to do things, time to be together, time to be apart.
Sounds like Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
For everything there's
Yeah, there's a time and a purpose.
right.
And that for me, we talked earlier about the difference of being at camp and then not being at camp and experiencing that contrast.
Mm-hmm.
For me, experiencing the contrast between a very well scheduled time where there was a purpose and a place and a community that shifted through the day and the week, but it was scheduled. Would leave camp, and suddenly my time was my own to arrange, to find community and meaning in, and that
Yes.
is not always easy.
No, it isn't. No.
Hmm.
It's a gift. It is truly a gift.
It is a gift. Who are some of the people who cross your memory? If I say, who are your Camp Mowana people who show up like little icons in the pocket?
Well, because all of our family had an opportunity to serve at Camp Mowana, when we get together, it's very easy to wander down memory lane and say, "Do you remember so and so? Do you remember this?" And yeah. One of the joys that has been a part of my life is I've had the privilege of marrying several staff couples, and that was always a treat. Actually, at one or two of them, They actually wanted to begin the ceremony with "In the name of the Father." So, oh my gosh, is that corny? But it seemed to be what they wanted. So, boy, I can't name a half a dozen that are more special than others. I just have fond memories of so many. And people like Justin Baxter and Katie, when they come back to mind, and Katie lost her dad and her mom. I was just, things keep showing up that remind me of relationships at Camp Mowana.
It's the whole, and it's good not to use such a strong term from our tradition, but the communion of saints. It is, past, present, future. Time collapses in places like that, and when you talk about places like that, I find.
Yeah.
Speaking of the communion of saints and those who would like to commune, how about, would you be okay if we open up to a little Q&A and
absolutely
see what some of our conversation may have prompted amongst the peanut gallery here on the top.
But I'm probably living on borrowed time because we have a 5-year-old grandson who may come charging in the house any moment because he needs to go to bed. So
no, right, I understand bedtime. Nick, how do you want to do this? Just to ask people if they want to unmute themselves and ask a question?
As long as there's not too much people talking on top of yourselves, but yeah, we'll just try to, if you have a question, feel free to unmute and jump in.
Okay. Question or comment either for Dale or prompted by this free-flowing conversation.
Camp Mowana, here we are.
Dale, my granddad was real active in the 50s back in the day at Camp Mowana, and I never thought about the topography being so different and all the things that weren't there. Like I really never pictured camp without the things I remember. And that's just, I don't really have a question, but it's just so neat to think about how the changes that, what wasn't there and what was there and what won't be there again for us as we go, walk around there. Are there things you're going to miss the most as it becomes a preserve?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm anxious to get to go back and see it. Mm-hmm. I really want to do that.
Yeah, I know I'm really, I think I want to go back to visit for any number of reasons, Dale, and I'm with you on that. One is just that I'm so grateful to the Parks Department for, taking this on and preserving it and keeping it. I think I'm also curious to go just to note in myself how I respond to it, given what, you and I have been talking about, that sense of immediately understandable mystique or sacredness, because I do actually thoroughly believe that continues and that is independent of what we do or do not do, that there's something there. But I'll be curious to note how I relate differently to it.
Something we didn't talk about is the smells. I mean, every cabin had its own unique aroma. Oswego did, Oneida did, just in the pine. I mean, everything. So will any of those show up when we go back?
Yeah, and I like the pine smell, the even just the deep sort of rich, the green of the woods. But yeah, walking inside Oswego for me has a very particular kind of smell, let alone cabins. The water. I'm beginning to look at the chat here. Courtney says the water. Courtney, do you mean the varied aromas of the water?
Yes. I went back with my family and I walked into Oswego and filled up my water bottle and I went, oh my, it's like there are a couple of aromas in my life. One is a lotion my grandfather got in the Keys a million years ago, and when I smell that in a store, it's rare, but it throws me back right next to him. And I filled my water bottle and just a flood of memories came back with that water and the smell that it brought forward of my
Yep.
all those years.
And the bathhouse on Inner Hill. Oh, yeah.
Dale, I'm curious, did you note a change in the water over the years? Did the camp switch to Mansfield city water at some point, or what did it remain a well?
It was still pretty bad. I mean, all the time I was there.
I'm sharing my bottled water here. You can't probably see the color of it, but it's real.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no, they switched to, I think, the city sewer, but the water has, as far as last summer, remained as it was and ever shall be.
Hey, Mike and Karen, do you guys remember, I know when Mike and I were on the advisory board, Eric got there was a chlorinator at Oneida that like wasn't functioning and just realized it just needed to be fixed. And so
It had never been
fixed.
connected, and it lasted, maybe a year before
Is
it
that
was
okay? I was wondering
dissolved
how
by the
it
stuff.
lasted.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it was a nice summer that year.
Could I share something?
Sure.
Would I be able to share something?
Go ahead, PJ.
What I would like to share is that it was really very important to be able to use that place in a special way, even to this day. With Eby and I, we can walk past part of the water that follow us, or we've been able to follow that in going past the house. The house that was a part of that place, and we would former times we'd sit down and relax, and that was right at the water, and you could see the water falling past the place, and it just really amazing, because we would see the water following and falls and that kind of thing. And so we would walk past at times. Pardon? It's refreshing. It's just really refreshing, and to see the water following as we followed the water, and how important that was, not only for us, but knowing that during the years, people still see that, and how important that is for them, and so we, just very much so, and to know that this is part of still part of the place, for all of them.
I feel that, PJ. I mean, for me, water, many things define Mowana and the land, but water defines that landscape for me. And it's, I mean, I no favoritism if I say that, dear Kelly Swinehart and I wasted many an hour when we were supposed perhaps to be doing something else by going on creek hikes, and the sense of just flow, the water flowing through that place, and continuing to do so. I think that's part of my curiosity in wanting to return back at some point.
Sure.
As well.
Even this day. Yeah, very much so. And I'm sure a lot of folks realize this in
Yeah.
their own way.
True.
Sure.
Rosie tells us that the tree outside of Oneida, which Courtney had noted the smell of, is technically a chestnut tree. Yes. Yes. Many smells.
Right.
Most.
Oh, boy, yeah.
Yeah, when that was in bloom, that was a powerful smell. My goodness.
Okay.
And Amy Kerr was mentioning with regard to the 50s that her grandfather's name was Jim Lumadou, and was that someone? Is that a name that is familiar to you, Dale, or was that? I'm guessing. I think.
Say it again.
Jim Lumadou. He was a pastor in Shelby.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
I know the name, but I can't go any further than that. It's a name that has someplace crossed my past. I know that. Yeah.
Yeah. He would have been
Yeah, I was just a kid.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yep. But names, I know I definitely grew up hearing of names for people that I never met, at Camp Mowana, and people would talk about this person, that person. I think when I was a child at family camp, I'm sure I met, was it Ellie? Yeah. But I have absolutely no memory of her whatsoever. But yet that's a name that signifies and holds a lot for other people. Virgil, I have strong memories of Virgil, but all of my memories of Virgil are as an old gentleman with jokes in that sense, whereas other people have memories of Virgil that are very differently located. And I think there's something about that passage of time.
You know how you catch a unique rabbit?
How do you
You
know?
sneak up on him. That's a Virgil joke.
Yes. Or I think of, I think you and I were talking earlier about Gary Hildebrand and his yes, I see. I'm a little teapot. Yep. Oh. Gosh darn it.
I'm a sugar bowl.
I'm a sugar bowl. Yeah. Never grows old. Never
No.
grows old. No.
Hello, everyone. I just want to, hi, Mark. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jeff.
But hi, such a joy to be here. And thank you, Pastor Dale, I have Kleenex in hand, and this is my third one, just so you know. But I just want to share a couple things. One, about the water. Cheryl Harner, current Richland County Park District Commissioner, has had some people come out, and they have GPSed every one of the 18 waterfalls on the property. I don't know if anyone would know that there are 18 waterfalls on the property. I mean, obviously we know the most famous one, but that there's so many soundscapes that we're talking about, sounds and smells, and it's so true. And I look forward to when everyone can come to visit that sacred space, as has been mentioned, because many of the qualities will be retained. I mean, it has to be. I mean, the place has not changed, the physical part. So I look forward to that. Secondly, I would like to ask Pastor Dale how those camp director meetings were when you were, and maybe I'm fishing here, but I was blessed enough to work with Pastor Dale as a fellow camp director within Lomo. So, I mean, we met maybe once a month.
Yes.
It sometimes seemed more often, but some of my greatest memories, Pastor Dale, are with our retreats. And so I just want to let you know that those were treasured moments.
I cherish those too, Jeff. Those meetings were generally not much fun. As I say, with tongue in cheek, but it was always our job then to translate what we heard or learned in those meetings to make it somehow palpable or back to the camps.
I know.
And
I will say, you mentioned the changing Friday night candlelight to Thursday night. Interestingly, that only happened at the youth camps. Luther was lucky
Yes.
enough
Right.
that we were not, and I'll use this word with loving kindness, forced to end our sessions on Friday. But anyway,
Yep.
there's a lot of empathy there. So
Those were the days, my friend.
friend.
We thought they'd never
never
end.
end. May I ask?
Singing
May I ask, Pastor Dale, without trying to dig too deeply into whatever, but I know that you were pulled to return to church ministry.
Yes.
Can I ask what compelled that? Because everyone's called for different reasons, so I'm just curious.
Certainly
Thank
you can.
Thank you.
I was actually doing a camp night for First Lutheran Church in Mansfield. We were singing camp songs and doing funny stuff just to promote Camp Mowana. And the lady who happened to be chairing the call committee was at that meeting, and First Lutheran Church was looking for a new pastor, and she said, "Would you be interested?" I said, "Oh gosh, I'm really happy at Camp Mowana." And she said, "Would you be interested?" I said, "Well, I'm really happy at Camp Mowana." So that's one of the reasons the chapel is so important to me, because the next day I spent hours in the chapel. And I confess that what I really missed was the daily community. During the summer, I had that at Mowana, but the rest of the year, it was not the same kind of community.
Right.
And so I think laying that before the Lord and hearing a pretty clear, yes, it's time to go. So, in a nutshell.
Yeah, actually, Dale, that is something I was thinking about prior to this. Your experience pretty unique in that regard, and definitely other people have experienced as well. PJ and Evie on this call, oh, these Zoom days that we live in. But to have experienced that the intense, well-populated summer community, and then in immediate contrast, you didn't move, but everyone else went away. And February, can be lovely and cold, and the world is dormant and waiting and lovely, but can be kind of lonely.
Yeah, that transition was always difficult.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of Mexican food coming in the kitchen here. I'd be glad to share with you, but.
All right. Nick, what are your thoughts on this and on time? Because we don't want to compromise either bedtime or Dale's dinner hour. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think
this is Deanna, and I wondered if it's possible for us to have an update on where we are with the Fleming's Falls.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks, Sandra. Before we let everyone go, or perhaps shift into a next thing, there are two things that Nick had asked me to mention. One of them is, before I get to that, everyone, if you've enjoyed this sort of conversation in a focused but free-flowing way, there's an invitation. It'll be showing up in a Facebooky way and other platforms for a second Campfire chat. So you can write down the date, but know that it'll be showing up in your various media feeds. Sunday evening, February 21st, 8 p.m. Jeff Burkett tells us that we'll be chatting with members of the Larkin family, as well as with Deb Fraze Watkins, the daughter of Virgil and Ruth Fraze. And so if you've enjoyed this, pay attention to that when that'll show up and come back for that. The Zoom link, Nick says, should be the same as the Zoom link for tonight. So you can squirrel that away, but also just pay attention in your media and come back for that one. Again, 21st February. Number two, be sure to check out the status and progress of the capital campaign over the course of February to raise money for the Fleming Falls observation deck. I know, and I'm happy to give you a little off-script testimonial. I plan on making a pledge myself to help support this, I think, really beautiful endeavor. Maybe even investigate ways to give a memorial gift in honor of my mother, who I think, as you all know, most of you know, loved that place in a similar sort of relationship. So pay attention to that this coming Sunday, February 7th, with regard to that. Exciting. Nick says we'll be unveiling on Facebook and in an email and on the website, the Fleming Falls Observation Deck, some special Mowana merchandise. Ooh, yes, but really apparently, including a new t-shirt, a set of coasters. I let your imaginations just fill in the blanks there. A set of coasters, a puzzle, a mug, or a poster. Really interesting stuff. So 100% of the proceeds from these things will go toward the Fleming Falls observation. So good stuff.
Thank you so much, Mark. I mean, so Adam Pate has designed some new Mowana and Fleming Falls Preserve, some items that are, I think, are really, really cool. And so we will be, and there's going to be some more photo-based things too, like the mugs and the puzzles and stuff. So it's going to be really cool. I mean, I think from here, with the size of group that we have, I mean, like if anyone has to go, I think unfortunately Dale might have left already. So we will continue to thank Dale so much for his joining us. I think we could either do breakout groups, or I think we've been comfortably chatting so far. So whatever people want. Jeff, did you have?
And to answer Deanna's question,
Thanks.
Jonathan shared today through Prince of Peace Lutheran Church in Loveland that our magic number is 94,000 of actual monies given. We have a number of monies that are still pledged, but we're making good progress, and we hope to have some final numbers up on the website soon. But right now, we're still trucking, so that's good. So that's the answer that we have for today.
Exciting. Thank you, Jeff. Nick, I'd be up for whichever. And
I'm sorry. Let's not forget the matching gift. So, I mean, we have 94, so we add a 94. That's 188. Just for the math people out there.
And what's the goal?
The goal is 225,000 by the end of February.
I mean, I think
225 plus the $200,000 matching gift.
I mean, I don't know. I think since we don't have too many, people, we can just continue to kind of stick around and chat for anyone who so chooses. I know it's later in the East Coast and Ohio than it is here in Chicago, so it's up to you all.
I'm fine staying in the same room. I have a question for you all. I hadn't, like, the notion of there being 18 waterfalls, and I seem to be echoing. I'm not sure what that is, so sorry about that. Did any of you ever name any of them?
Mark, you can echo in my mind any day you want.
Thank you. Very kind. Did any of you ever name any of the other waterfalls or have names for them? I know I did a few, but I never knew if they were Mark specific or if they were shared with other people.
Not knowing that there were 18 falls and only really ever seeing Fleming's, and then the one at the dip in the road, and then the one that was behind, at the, as you're going up to Inner Trail, which would have been behind the Mandan.
Yeah.
At the time, I just called that Small Falls because it was small. I don't know if anybody else had. It was one of my favorite places to sit. So.
Wasn't that Chipmunk Falls?
That is what I have heard other people refer to it. And my last summer was 84. So I've heard people from like 85 on refer to it as Chipmunk Falls.
If anyone would like to see pictures and the GPS locations of all these falls, message me in Facebook and I will gladly send you the PDF because the engineering has been done. So
That's
I mean,
exciting.
for any doubters out there about how many falls there are, we have physical proof.
If you started the dip in the road and you head towards, downstream, each of those shelves is considered a waterfall, correct? Is that what they're charting?
Yes, I mean, some of them are very, very,
Right, but some
short,
are
but
a
still,
little bigger.
the
Yeah.
water is falling.
Falling.
So
Okay.
Falling water.
Falling water.
Bye, Mike.
I heard that, Mike. Yeah, I used to love some of the ones on the small creek. If you are hiking downstream from the dip in the road down toward the Y, the Y bridge in that direction. But there were some lovely ones down in there that you could really only reach by walking along the creek and then climbing and going along the creek bed. And they felt so, I think, magical because of that.
you all might be interested to know that there are a number of people with the Richland County Park District that are designing new trails, and a couple of them do go along the creek bed, where soon you'll be able to walk and count the number of waterfalls. But those trails are actually being designed and made as we speak.
Wonderful.
There's one of the metro parks here in Cincinnati that we were hiking a few weeks ago. There's one of the trails it's a gorge trail, goes along the creek that runs through there, and has a similar series of little waterfalls. And whenever I hike that trail, I always think of Mowana and those same falls. And Mark and I hiked that trail many times together too. That was always one of my favorite parts of Mowana, was that walking along that creek bed there and seeing all those little falls that were mesmerizing.
Yeah.
Great cabin action was always trying to dam up the little falls, like that Chipmunk Falls. See, okay, kids, see if you can stop the water. Cabin action.
I shudder to think that, I think I even led, it was, what do we call them? The activities that they could choose to do in the afternoon. Like
Creative activities.
Creative activities, there we are. I did a creative activity that I think I just called ravine climbing. And I kind of shudder to think that where the whole idea was to take, 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds to one side of the ravine where it was at kind of its steepest on that, and say, okay, everyone, choose your tree on the other side of the ravine and get there.
Thankfully, no videos were taken during the engagement of that unsafe activity.
Really?
Kind of like when we would tell later counselors that we used to take kids down into Hoppy's cave and their eyes would get about this big.
Shocking.
Yeah.
So Mark, do you remember one week on family camp? I don't know if Liz was with us or not, but we went down to the entrance and we got in the creek, and instead of going toward Oneida, we went the other way. And we walked for a while, and then we thought, we probably better get back. It's probably time to do something. And so we just went up the hill, and then we came to the fence because we'd been off property.
Right.
It doesn't go that way. So we had to climb through the barbed wire fence to get back on the
I did find that fascinating.
Some campers wrote postcards home about that experience, but they have never been found.
Mm-hmm.
I did find that fascinating. PJ's comment about the water and the centrality of it to the place. And when I really think about what anchored me there and the place I will always want to go back to and see last, see first, it was that creek bed. It's amazing. And it's true, that will never go away. Whatever buildings are there or not.
It was the water in the creek that made all those waterfalls and dug out that ravine and did amazing work over how many millenniums.
Right.
Water is very central to the whole place.
Yeah.
Especially the sulfur water.
Yeah.
Was the quiet I called it the quiet. I don't remember what I called it, but there was a place by the Quiet Bridge. There was a big rock, and I used to do poetry writing there with the kids.
Yes.
And I can't remember what I called it, but it was like the quiet place is kind of what I think but it was in that little corner of the Quiet Bridge.
So is this so Courtney, I was never sure. I think that's, so you're crossing the Quiet Bridge and just downstream from it, a big rock ledge.
To the left, yeah.
A waterfall, yeah.
When you're going up to Inner Hill, it's to the left.
I get it. Is that the one that, Sue, that you were calling Chipmunk Falls? Yeah?
Chipmunk Falls to me is the one right as you're coming down from Junior Hill, right before you get to the Quiet Bridge. Yes.
With the big mossy
big
ledge.
shelfie kind of thing. Yeah.
Goes down.
Yes.
Oddly enough, one of my favorite photos that I took every time I went was the other side of the Quiet Bridge, looking away from that rock. Those tall trees. It was a flat expanse of water, very gently water, going. But
one of my favorite. Go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead, Yana. Just we have a new person joining.
When we moved back to Ohio, Steve and I were living in Northern New York, and we moved back to Ohio, and not that long later, maybe 3 or 4 years later, it must have been, anyway, the first Operation Arrowhead. I'm trying to think of when that actually started, but Peter, my youngest, was really tiny, and Nicholas, you were so kind as to take the boys, my boys, creek walking during that, and it was so wonderful to know that I could just send them off with you, and that they could enjoy hiking the creek just like I did, and it was just wonderful to
It was probably
have
more
that as
to go for a creek walk, and the only way I could do that and not do other work is if I had small children with me. So I kidnapped them. But yeah, I'm glad it worked out for both of them.
good plan. But it was really special that they got that experience. So.
Well, that reminds me of something that I always felt about family camp with 3 kids and, the 8 that the Shackles had, or however many kids were there. You didn't worry about where they were. You knew they were with somebody that would watch out for them and take care of them, and they were watching out for each other. And it was a very freeing week. Not that I didn't love being with my children, but it was nice to know that I could not be with them and they'd still be okay.
And we'd be having fun on our own without you.
That's a big assumption with Kelly. I don't know. I'm not sure if I go there.
Well, now that she's posting things like we crawled through the pipe under the dip in the road, I'm, may have to rethink all of that. But.
So I first had FOMO, fear of missing out. That was a thing I had at family camp because I did not want to go to sleep because I didn't want to miss it. So we were up till, 2, 4, we'd order pizza, we'd walk down to get it. Like, I did not want to go to sleep. I just wanted to stay awake the entire week. Because when you're asleep, you miss it.
Dave, yes, Pastor Dale did mention the summer of the kale, of the kale. I don't think kale ever came anywhere near Camp Mowana, but the summer of the cow invasion was discussed. Dale brought that up. Yeah, and he brought up in the context of one of the weeks of camps for children with asthma that the Red Cross used.
Yeah. Mark, what year was that? What year was the asthma Camp Cow invasion? Because we had a very interesting cow incident in the about 83 or 84.
Oh, exciting. No, what I heard Dale describe was, at least I got the sense it was during his tenure as director, which is...
I remember that.
Yeah.
It was the week that we were camping, and they came in and peed all over campsites in the pines, and... But yeah, but
it was more of a herd incident versus, I think, Christine, your incident it was like a pseudo intruder event, right? Wasn't that the story of that one?
Yes. we had we may have had intruders during the week, and so we were all on alert. And as naturalist, I was on administrative staff. I think it was 83 or 84. And we just sort of kind of made some plans for what would happen if we were on outpost and there were ever any intruders. And Aaron Pritchard had a bunch of kids out by what I would call Starlight, which would have been on I think it's one of the campsites along the farm fields. Yep. And Aaron used the bat phone, called in, said, we have intruders, we have intruders. I hear them, they're out in the field, they're just waiting. And there's all these low voices and everything. And so we called the cops. I waited for the cops to come to direct them. And before the cops even got there, they came back in and they were like, well, we found the intruders. It was the cows out, in the field. And the way they figured it out with the cows is that I think it was, who would have been PD that year? I can't remember. Brian
Gail.
Brian
Gail,
and Gail
yeah.
were out there. And somebody said, oh, one of them's taking a piss. And it kept going and going and going. And finally they said to Aaron, Aaron, it's cows. It's cows. So Aaron has never lived that down. So if you ever get to speak to Aaron, just remind him about cows.
One of the things I always loved about that story was it then made me more skeptical of future potential intruder incidents. So that when the kitchen staff came to my cabin one night and woke me up because they were convinced there were intruders, I really didn't buy into it. And then I saw the turkeys walk by my window about 3 minutes later and told them they were a bunch of idiots and they needed to go to bed.
Yeah.
Stop waking me up. Yeah.
Those cows.
Yeah. You're right. Aaron has never lived that down, which is a good thing. He deserves stories like that to be told about him for a long time. Yes.
I remember they had motorcycles in to try to herd them out. And it was such a strange thing to hear motorcycles up there on Inner Hill.
I think I was actually at camp at one time in the off season and was walking through, and the cows had actually gotten back behind Council Fire on Inner Hill. They'd actually gotten off and we're roaming around over there.
Yeah, fence was in terrible shape back there, so it's not surprising that they found ways in there.
Those are some great memories of the winter retreat that we would go out, to Mohican, and that was just lovely, wasn't it?
And such a sense of contrast for me, Diana, because to be there in the summer was to be so thoroughly immersed in summer, because you're outdoors all the time, and from mosquitoes, thunderstorms to, but summer, and the heat, and it was such a contrast to be there in the winter, especially if there would be snow. And I remember, talking about this with any number of you folks, how much smaller the place would look in the winter because you could, be in the Oswego parking lot and look over to Inter Hill, things like that.
And that first time that you see, oh my gosh, it's right there. I thought it was way over there.
Right.
You see the trees for the first time.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, were you with me talking about those backwoods back where the cows got in? That time, Gerald, when Mary was the director, and Gerald had her husband, who wasn't always very nice to us, and he was a sculptor, and he had these huge logs back there that he was going to sculpt into something, but Mary made a couple of us go out and help him load these huge logs up. I remember being rather resentful, feeling like I'm just cheap labor here, and there's no reason, this is not my job description to be trying to lift up 400-pound logs for Gerald to do his sculpting. Were you part of that, Mike? I don't remember who else was with me when we were out there trying to do that.
I did not hear you because I just was letting my dog out.
Oh, wow. I was talking about loading up a bunch of logs for Gerald, Mary's husband.
Oh,
One
no,
summer.
I wasn't up. I wasn't there
Okay.
during that time.
I was thinking about Mary when we went back for, I don't know if this is what Deanna was talking about with the winter retreat, but when we would go back, or a couple of years, we went back as a staff and got together in the winter for an overnight and hung out. And one year when Mary was there, we had brand new baby lambs. And I think Susanna and Jonathan, you guys were there then, and Christine had named them. What'd you say?
I don't think I was there with lambs, but.
Oh, well, Christine had named them, and she named them, and my kids know this story, so they're probably gonna chime in, but she named them Mackenzie, Water, and Dirt. And we went back at Christmas, and I was so excited to see the lambs and how big they were and how long their hair was and everything. And Matt Winger was there at the time, and I said, Matt, can we go out to the farm and see the lambs? And he goes, they're not very far away. And I said, what do you mean they're not far away? And he's like, well, they're not at the farm. And I said, Matt, where are the lambs? And he opens up the freezer, and they're all wrapped in white paper with their names written on them. And I was a vegetarian for 6 months after that.
We were talking about, camp as a spiritual place, a place for us to ground ourselves in our faith. And I just remember winter retreat being such a spiritual boost in the middle of everything, and then just being renewed during that event and that Christmas time. And that was it was an important part of the year, and sorely missed once I couldn't return.
Mike says, Mike just left. Sorry, say goodbye to Mike. Yeah. Sorry.
That's one of the things I thought about this year with COVID, and how we were all so sad that camp ended, period. But I've worked in many fields and camp counseling and education, and now I'm a receptionist at a law firm. And I just kept thinking how I could not have imagined not being able to hug on the kids or braid the hair or hold the hands or sing the songs, and how grateful I was that we were all given such an opportunity to try and go say goodbye and to remember it without this weird dynamic. And I know we would have done what we always did, which was make it so special. But when you think about how it all went down and our opportunity to mourn and so forth, I am grateful that it happened before COVID.
Right. No, I definitely share that. Odd as that is to phrase it like that.
I didn't even think about that, but you gave me a total gratitude for the night. That was a really, really special weekend.
Yeah, I think we thought about that this August and thought, what if it had been one more year and we didn't get to do that? Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I also remembered all those talks during staff training of don't touch the kids and all that stuff, and it was like, okay, and then get there, who wants a piggyback? And they're hanging off of you on Junior Hill, and you're like, this is what it is. That's what they need.
Yeah.
So that would have been really hard to have it be like, officially healthy behavior, not just not inappropriate behavior.
Yeah.
Social distancing and virtual hugs lived in a very different sort of weekend in August.
Yeah.
Yeah, when your camper breaks their ankle and you have to piggyback them like all over camp, and they're like in 5th grade, and they're
or if your camper doesn't have legs. And you have to
Yeah.
carry them
Yeah.
around.
On the
I was
trail.
thinking about that too, Dave, and the noise girls too that we would carry all.
I
over
looked
the
him
place.
up recently, actually.
Oh, Dave, you broke up.
Sorry, my connection's a little bad, but I looked up that camper on Facebook. I'm trying to remember, he was performing. I'm trying to remember the name of the organization he's performing with, but I was, so I friended him on Facebook, and I let him know about Mowana, so he was sad to hear about that.
Dave, you mentioned in the chat, or you asked me whether I remembered and were you there? I don't know whether you were there too, Jonathan, but being in Logan, the old Interhill program director's cabin, at least during our era, it was, and the PA system exploded. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
You landed in my lap, Mark, because you went flying backwards. I was sitting in that chair across the room, and it just marks in my lap, and what in the heck happened? Yeah,
I mean, terrifying. One of
you had mentioned earlier about feeling grounded at camp. Yeah.
I don't know, Dave. Dad joke, most definitely.
Yeah, I know, but still, that was one of the loudest sounds I've ever heard, an exploding PA system.
it was a low point of the summer for me because I was PD, which meant I had control of that PA to play all the morning music I wanted to. My playlist was ready to go, and kaboom, it blew up before we even had the summer start. And then we had to just try and pipe as much of Suzanne's music over as we could.
One of the many,
was already.
I mean, one of the many things that could have sent that cabin sliding down the ravine.
You don't think the bowling alley that was underneath it would have grounded it enough? That was a sad summer when I realized there was no bowling alley.
It's just Dorito storage. That was-
The things we believe.
Well, people are still free to stick around as long as they want. I mean, I think even just these conversations we've been having, I think are really great. And I'd love to kind of put this whole thing on YouTube for posterity. But if anyone objects to any of that, you can send me an email privately or whatever. But and I'll talk to Dale too and stuff. But so I'm not saying anyone has to leave. I'm not saying I'm necessarily leaving, but whatever people think.
Well, since it's technically a chestnut tree, I think that we could put all of this on there.
Speaking of which, I have a question for Rosie. I think I'm at least somewhat knowledgeable about where everyone is these days. Rosie, where are you? I don't know where you are or what you're doing these days.
Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a geologist for the state.
Wonderful.
So you can explain those GPS maps of all of our 18 waterfalls to all of us then. Maybe we'll have you as a guest speaker one of these future times. And you can
Well, I just looked up the rock type because I didn't really get into geology till college, so was unaware, and I looked it up.
Rosie, I was going to ask you, how much did camp influence your decision to become a geologist?
I'd say none.
Okay.
I was actually dual major religion and geology
Oh, I
because I
love
was
that.
thinking about being a pastor. Because of my last 2 years at camp as a camper and then 1 year on staff. But I decided that that was not the career for me. And so then I found geology, and that's where I ended up.
I love that. I mean, I just, as a complete geological layperson, as it were, I find, the idea of deep time present in geology to be a profoundly spiritual sort of encounter, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It's so where I live is like very conservative minded,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of one of my neighbors is a young earther, and I had a bumper sticker that in large text said, "I found Jesus," and the fine print was, "He was behind the sofa the whole time." And she just saw the large print and she's like, "Oh, are you a young earther or an old earther?"
Whoa.
And I was like, like really old. And then realized like there's no common ground.
Oh,
And I don't feel there needs to be a conflict, but so many people do. And
right.
I don't even know where to start with them.
No, no. I mean, no surprise. I think amongst the Moana heads here that there's absolutely no conflict in that these are different ways of encountering phenomena, you know. But I mean, I do find the idea of rocks and their evolution as a way of uh, representing time and change over time to be really, really beautiful. Like I know those rock ledges at Camp Mowana are, you know, we said, you know, the water is so defining of the place, and it is, but, you know, like you were saying, Sue, the water and its interaction with the ledge really defines the landscapes there, and makes all the little waterfalls and so on. And that was so present, just walking around the rocks.
Well, I think it took me a while to realize that it was a special place, not just because I grew up there sometimes in the summer or whatever, but like in terms of like natural beauty, it is like, I mean, there's only a handful of places like that in Ohio, you know, and like not here in Illinois or anything. And so I think, and then, I mean, as much as I loved being there with the campers and stuff and other staff, but then like if I was there on a retreat or anything else, and it was like, you know, this 180 acres of this natural beauty was like all to yourself, and like your own personal playground was amazing.
When Fleming Falls Preserve open, it will be open really to the public without asking permission for the first time in 141 years. If you count the 1880s when it was owned privately as a resort and people sought it out as a picnic place, all the way through 2019, or actually 2021 yet, because it's not open. It's 141 years that it's been, you know, cordoned off, and you had to ask permission. And now I think that's one of the greatest things is that now everybody gets to see this specialness, and everybody can come and refresh and relax and reflect. And I'm really excited about that. That's why Fleming's Falls Observation Deck is such a cool project.
Hmm. So, Rosie, if you're still on the call, how would you describe the geology of north central Ohio as we encountered it there?
So I had to look this up. I didn't know this off the top of my head. This is probably further sorting needed. The Maxville Limestone, the Rushville, Logan, and Cuyahoga formations. Devonian to Mississippian age. And here's our biblical influence. The Devonian is the age of the fishes. So like we observed there, mostly shale. Some siltstone and sandstone, which is what's forming the ledges. And possibly limestone. There ought to be fossils, though I never remember any or hearing of any. So I'll have to go give it another look.
Yeah, think about those cliffs, you know, definitely lots of sandstone, but those stepping stone those smaller falls we were talking about, that's where I always thought of the shale up in that area that created a lot of those really pretty smaller waterfalls. But you're right. I don't remember. I was thinking the limestone too. That park I was talking about here that's got the stair step falls. That's pretty much all limestone, and there's tons of fossils. It's one of the kind of treasure troves in Cincinnati of fossils in that old gorge. But yeah, I don't remember seeing a lot of limestone in Mowana. That'd be interesting to poke around and look.
And I think it would have been under the glacial ice sheet. So to look and see if there's any evidence of, pieces of Canada left behind.
It is in the Lake Erie watershed, right? I mean, that would be source that still running down to there. Is that right, Rosie? Do you know?
I think it goes the other way.
Oh, okay.
There's only a thin strip of Lake Erie watershed.
Okay.
Yeah. I see some other sage natural sciences heads nodding. Yes. Yeah, I think the Mohican heads toward the Muskingum. Is that right? Eventually, I mean, I always felt very proud of that when we lived in Marietta.
Yes, it's part of the Muskingum watershed district.
But that the water that flew over Fleming Falls would eventually flow past my house in Marietta.
Yeah, I always thought it was neat growing up in Richland County how at my house the water would flow down to the Ohio River, but in the northern edge of Richland County where my grandfather lived in Plymouth, his would flow north up to Lake Erie.
Jen, can you talk a little bit about the hemlock? Jeff was telling me something on the phone the other day about the uniqueness of camp and the hemlock. And I just remember, taking the trail down to Fleming's and I didn't see hemlock anywhere else except for in the Hocking Hills.
Areas of eastern hemlock like that are rare to find in places in Ohio. In Richland County, I believe we say there's either 2 or 3 stands of it because there's some at another falls that's I'm not thinking of the name right now, but a falls down by the Mohican. It's called Hemlock Falls. That's what it's called, and so it is pretty unique in how much shade and stuff it gives. You get so much more shade from the hemlock. And of course we worry because the hemlock, when I was living down in Virginia, is all getting attacked by an invasive insect. And we worry about that's far enough north up to the Hocking area now. And we worry about it coming further north.
Its presence there was probably just that it escaped being logged because hemlocks were taken down for tanning purposes, and maybe the steepness of those valleys was enough to just save them from the axe.
I just read a novel that I'm sure some of you have called The Overstory, which spends a fair amount of time. I mean, I'm not sure that I recommend it as a piece of fiction, but it great encounter with just natural history and woods and trees. And it was making me think of the Mowana woods in many ways, and their how primeval they appeared to me, yet I'm sure it's almost entirely second growth, other than some of the spots down, like you're saying, Rosie, down in the clefts, as it were. Would you say so?
The primeval feel.
Oh, that, but also just, would you call it all at least second growth forest? I mean, I know that there are a few spots in Ohio where there are some old growth trees still, but I never got that sense that was true of any of our woods.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know it had been protected for 140 years. And since it was always if it started out as a resort, it might have been clear cut before the resort, but once it's a resort, they probably let it get kind of naturey.
Well, and then all the human use, continuous human use. I mean, just think about what you saw cut down in the summer because something had fallen or, there had to be room for something else. So continuous use over that time. Speaking of cutting things down, I don't know if you looked at the history or not, but there's evidence in the history that Oneida, all those, just the wooden rail was cut from the property there. And as part of the observation deck project, they are trying to save those. Joel Larkin has set aside those rails, and it's hoped that they're incorporated back into the new observation deck design. There will be a barrier between the public and those original rails so that, there's preservation, plus those rails are not Americans with Disability Act. So it will be wonderful if they can be incorporated back in along with the stone. I'm headed out too. Good night, guys.
Okay.
Wonderful. Lots
See ya.
of fun with you.
Shall we call it? Nick, thank you very much for organizing and doing this. And I'll write to Dale as well and say,
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, hopefully you all can join us again on the 21st so we can chat some more. Thank you, Mark. We will all thank Dale too. And great to see you all.
Great to see everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Everybody.
Bye.